Here's your host, Bob Furr, filling in for Jeff Hood, filling in for Marc McMain on Wednesdays. Happy Hump Day, everybody out there in true country. It is high noon, and as the lady said, it is time for the Marc McMain Show here on Real Talk, Q92.3. I am here with, as always, Chastity Stewart, making the magic happen. Chastity, great to see you as always. I feel like it's been, a day?
Yeah, we're becoming like regulars, so absolutely great to have you here today, Bob. Great full house, it looks like. Super excited about today's show.
Well, cool. Hey, so before we go any further, I want to, again, I plugged it yesterday. I want to plug it again. Cool event happening tomorrow night in Madison at Town Park. It's open mic night, right? Yes. So whether you sing, whether you dance, comedy, read poetry, storytell, do historic impersonations, juggle chainsaws, whatever your gig is, you get a chance to come out, show it off for the community, kind of a Madison's Got Talent type of thing. I'm sure there's trademark violations on that. But you can get out there. It's between 7 and 8:30 at the Pavilion in Town Park. You get about 5 minutes. You do got to register when you get there. The registration opens at 6:30. So you can check out the Madison Main Street. Is it Main Street Madison or Madison Main Street? I get a little dyslexic with it. Main Street MadisonGA.com page, or you can check out their Facebook page or reach out to Colleen Hall at CHALL at MadisonGA.com to get more information on that cool event. So I don't know if they're going to have food and drink there or anything like that, but not lots of great restaurants around. Speaking of food and drink, Chastity, what would you say is your favorite thing to eat and drink?
Ooh, favorite food? I would say pasta. I love pasta. And then my favorite all-time drink, I guess, is probably coffee. I love a cold coffee.
You're not alone. You're not alone in that regard.
No.
Well, if you think about it, food is really at the center of our lives, right? I mean, most of us think at least 3 times a day about what are we going to eat, and then of course there's thinking about food shopping, having food in the house, and then let's come to water, right? Water is tied to everything we do. Everything we drink, second only to oxygen in terms of the things that we need to survive. You can survive. I was surprised to see this. You can actually survive 1 to 2 months without food.
Yes.
You're not going to be in very great shape after the end of it because your body is basically digesting itself, but you can only make it 3 to 5 days without water. Right. And so water really at the center of it. So, here in Madison, for most people anyway, food and drink, it's really a first world problem. The one downside I would say I've kind of felt about moving to the area is, it's just a small town, so there's only so many restaurant choices. So my wife and I, the discussion has gone from we can't decide where to eat because there's too many restaurant choices to we can't decide where to eat because there's too few restaurant choices and we've eaten every place and gone through the menu too many times. But for many people today, food security is a real issue. Thankfully in America, it's a very small percentage of the population, and they categorize it into 4 levels. There's high food security, which means you have no issues or anxiety. You have adequate food, nutritious access, no problems. Marginal, occasionally it causes anxiety or access. I'm not sure that not enough restaurants in Madison would qualify for that. But there's no real significant reduction in your intake. And then there's 2 levels of what they call food insecure, which is low, means that there are issues with the quality, variety, desirability of what you eat, but there's no real significant disruption to your ability to eat. And that's about 8% of the population. But for the very low food insecurity, that is where intake is noticeably reduced. Their eating patterns are disrupted. There's a lack of resources. I mean, these are people who are going hungry. Thankfully, though, in our country, that's only about 5.4% of the population. Now, today in our country, really a lot of the food security issues revolve around not so much too little food, but maybe too much food. We've got a bigger problem. I was surprised by this, too. About 32 to 47% of our country's population is defined as obese, which means that your weight is enough that it's affecting your weight. I feel like I'm the only person in the room that meets that category right now, which is upsetting. Now, they began tracking that in the 1960s. At that point, so get this. So today it's 32 to 47%. In 1960, when they began tracking it, it was only 13%. Before World War II, it was under 5%. Before the Civil War, it essentially was 0%.
Wow.
right? So that really shows you how the evolution of food has gone down in this country. So it occurred to me as we've been doing our Tuesdays 250 by 50 series, as you look through the different chapters of America's story, basic survival was the main part of many of those chapters, whether it be disease, elements, attack, the weather, accidents, fire, and of course, being able to find food and drink. I mean, the very first colonists, they arrive here and it's like job 1, we need shelter. Job 2, we need to get food and water before what we have runs out. Job 3 is we got to find enough to sustain ourselves, and many of them didn't, right? Like the Roanoke colony and Jamestown the first time around, Pilgrims, they all suffered with starvation and such like that. It wasn't in this country until the mid 1850s, the turn of the century, that we really shifted from what you would call subsistence farming to, we're farming for other people, we're growing food, we're producing food for other people and such. And we didn't really start to see food stores. The very first one they mark is 1859, but it didn't really become widely available until the 1930s. And really that was mainly just in cities and such. In rural areas, people still depended on finding their own food and water sources, and really doing so was a matter of staying alive each day. And by the way, if you were in cities, that assumed you had the money to buy the food that was available to you. So it didn't take much to get you off your game and really run into trouble with food. You're listening to the Marc McMain Show here on True Country 92.3. Bob Furr filling in for Jeff Hood, who normally fills in for Mark on Wednesday. We're going to be talking about the evolution of food security in America, but specifically here in our area. And we're going to get some help with that from 2 local perspectives. So now, as I talk about what we're going to do today, another thing occurred to me, and that is when we talk about the Tuesdays 250 by 50, it's kind of on this grand scale, right? But it's almost unimaginable to try to take in how fast and dramatic the progression of this vast country on this vast landscape was. So a good way to do that is to put it into a local context. And, when I started the trolley tour, I was thinking about having for this year a special America 250 trolley tour. But I realized very quickly I already had one. Right? I already had an America. I'm really basically telling America's story through Madison's eyes. So today, we're going to tell the story of progression of American food and water security through the city of Madison's eyes. That's what I got in mind for you here today. So to do that, I've got 2 great local perspectives to help me out. First, we have Ken Coker, official title, information specialist and planner with the city of Madison. Now, the first, I've known Ken for a while. I've got to see him in action, observed him in the wild, if you will. And I would say that his title is somewhat inadequate. At first, that's what I thought. Okay. And now I've come to realize it's absolutely perfect. Because being an information specialist and helping people plan with that information is exactly what I've seen Ken do. However, I do believe that the title, you should change your title officially to Knower of All Things. I think that's a better title. So welcome back to the show, Ken. Great to have you again.
Thanks a lot. And this time I'll give you more than 10 minutes of my time.
So let me ask you this, Ken. When did you first come to Madison? Just to set some quick context. We've had you do your introduction a couple times, but I'd like to know when you first came to Madison.
So I first started doing some work for Madison right out of graduate school around 1994.
Okay.
But it was, just on a once-a-month sort of basis. But had a more permanent relationship with Madison starting in 2000.
So you've been immersed in Madison for many years, but you're still a relative newcomer, right? So I feel like we also need a perspective of somebody who's been here for quite some time. And so I want to welcome back to the show Mary Jane Jones. Great to see you, Mary.
Wow. So that is quite familiar. I do appreciate if you would follow decorum. It is Miss Jones.
I'm sorry, a Yankee faux pas there, Miss Jones. I apologize. So welcome back to the show, Miss Jones.
Thank you so much. I would like to note that my horse and carriage did get me here on time, Mr. Coker. Perfectly on time. Maybe just fashionably late, but still here when the show started.
Now, Miss Jones, let's get context with you, too. When did you first arrive here in Madison?
Well, I don't want to age myself too much, but I did get here in the 1830s when my daddy bought Heritage Hall. I'm not going to say more than that. Last time we had this discussion about age, and I just don't want to revisit that topic, sir.
Well, let's just go with the fact that you got to Madison in the 1830s. Ma'am, would it be too forward of me to say that you really look quite good for your age?
I'd agree with you.
All right. Well, you're listening to the Marc McMain Show. Bob Furr filling in for Jeff Hood, who normally fills in for Mark on Wednesdays. We are going to take a short commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to walk through the story of food and drink and its evolution with Madison's history and how it impacted that history and how that history impacted food and drink. We'll be right back.
The Madison Trolley Company is Morgan County's newest 5-star attraction. We offer historic Madison tours year-round, a haunted history experience in the fall, and our Madison Lights Christmas Tour and Mary Maddie Express Adventure for kids have become new holiday traditions. Our private charters add vintage charm to weddings and special occasions aboard a historic trolley by day, party trolley by night. Find us on the Madison Town Square or get on board by visiting madisontrolley.com or calling us at 706-997-1800.
When you walk through the doors of Campton Restaurant, you're not just here for a meal, you're part of a tradition. I'm fourth generation owner Josh Parker, and for nearly 40 years, families in Walton County and surrounding areas have gathered around our tables to share stories, laughter, and good Southern cooking. From crispy fried chicken to heart-healthy daily specials, there's always a plate waiting with your name on it. We're open Tuesday through Thursday from 11 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. and 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. Fridays and Saturdays. So come on by, make yourself at home, and experience Campton Restaurant, where family tradition meets every meal.
I chuckled at a cartoon that showed a news conference by a United States senator who announced that he was divorcing his family so he could spend more time with politics. We may laugh, but the truth is many people make that statement every day. Maybe not with words, but with their actions. In fact, if a politician retires from his work to spend more time with his family, it becomes the lead story met with cynicism on the evening news, while the one who rejects his family advancing his career is commonplace. God tells us we should work hard to the glory of God. But he has clearly shown that we must have priorities. A relationship with God first, and family follows that. What does your focus tell you about your priorities? The Bible says that we have brought nothing into this world and we can take nothing out of it. It's good to focus on the things that last, like putting God first, and then family, and then people all around us that God loves. This is Bryant Wright, speaking right from my heart.
Visit rightfromtheheart.org and click television to watch our TV spots.
All right, welcome back, folks, to the Marc McMain Show here on True Country, Q92.3. You guys notice the True Country now instead of Real Country. I thought, Chastity, I was going to come in here today and see the swear Real Country jar here.
No, I'm proud of you.
Had to put it.
Hey,
so far,
you've done great.
so good. I just jinxed myself, I'm sure. So welcome back to True Country. Hey, we're going to be digging in now to talking about the history of food and water in our area. You know, I want to start out by talking about the first people in our area, which of course, were the Muskogee, right? And the Europeans later called them the Creek. Now, they got called the Creek because they lived along the Ocmulgee River, and the early trappers that came to the area called that the, I think it's Okeechee or Cheesy. Either one of you know that? All right, we'll just go with, I'll just go with both of them. But I think it was the Ocheesee Creek Indians, and then they shortened that later to Creek Indians. Now, the last show I was talking about the phrase, God willing and the Creek don't rise. And I don't know if I said it exactly right. I want to be clear about this. So, you know, most people attribute the saying, God willing and the creek don't rise, meaning as long as everything goes as planned, you know, I'll be able to accomplish this or I'll be able to get there as, you know, God willing, of course, and if water, like the creek, I can get over the river, the creek doesn't rise. Well, there's a popular Southern theory that it actually refers to the Creek Native Americans rising up against Europeans. So, you know, God willing, and if the Creek Native Americans don't rise. That's attributed to a guy named Benjamin Hawkins, who is a political figure and what they used to call an Indian agent, who supposedly back in the 1700s in a letter to George Washington, the president, you know, wrote that and capitalized the word Creek. And it's from that people come up with the idea, oh, he meant the Creek Native Americans. The only problem is that phrase doesn't exist in any of the original surviving letters from him. So I think we should probably go with the saying that it's supposed to be water. Speaking of water, Ken, it's safe to say, right, that Madison became Madison the same way that all early American towns became early American towns because of water. Tell us that story.
So most of you probably know about Round Bowl Springs, and I know we're going to mention that later, but that was one of the main, it's why the Native Americans were in this area as well. It was a good source of drinking water. And actually, I don't know if people realize, but Madison actually sits not on a true north-south grid. It's canted a little bit, and that's because Main Street runs a ridge that's between the Sugar Creek watershed and the Hard Labor Creek watershed. And so that actually gives us a lot of springs that are focused downtown. So that's why there's a pond behind Town 220 that's fed by a natural spring. It's actually probably was part of that natural spring that had Madison centered here.
And just out of curiosity, you may not know this, but there was a competition, right, between two springs, as I understand it. So I'd heard there was a competition between Round Bowl Spring and another spring, and Round Bowl Spring won. So I was just curious of where the other one, might be. So, but it's interesting, right? So you have this spring, right? So first thing, the animals are attracted. Wildlife is attracted to it. And so they make trails. And so now the Native Americans follow the trails, both to get to the water source, but also to hunt the animals. Now along come the Europeans, the settlers, the trappers. They follow the same trails. And so now the very first people here in the area, the Native Americans, are living on what they used to call the Three Sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. And that's what gave rise to like hominy, grits, that sort of thing. They're also, of course, foraging for newts, for fruits, nuts, or newts. If you don't have time, you just say fruit and nuts together, newts, herbs and spices and such. And they're hunting small game, also big game. And two big game that we had in the area, elk and buffalo. There were American bison as far into our area as well, are again now at the Georgia Safari Conservation Park. So tell us now about the settlement part, Ken. Tell us about the first people. There were people here before Madison was incorporated in 1808, 1809, American Revolutionary War veterans, as I understand it.
Right.
So just tell us about people coming to the area and Madison becoming Madison.
Well, after the Revolutionary War, the Georgia now state government decided that they would apportion lands out to people through a lottery system. And so we were an early land lottery. Before that, quite a few Revolutionary War veterans were given property as kind of payment for their service during the war. So we have a lot of people coming from Virginia this way, and some of that is because of war veterans, and then some of that is just kind of was a natural evolution down through the South from Virginia.
And that's the connection to Morgan County. So about 60 of them, they served under a general by the name of Daniel Morgan, who of course is our county namesake. So now they had those land lotteries because at this point, early 1800s, Lewis and Clark have just got back from their adventure to the Pacific, but most Americans live within 25 miles of the Atlantic seaboard. And so now in Georgia, they're trying to get people to move away from Savannah and the coast. But to get to do that, you got to be able to sustain and feed yourselves. And so they give them these plots of land in the interest of them developing that land and coming out there. One of the first things they did, as I understand it, once they established the town, was to protect that spring. Tell us what that looked like.
Yeah, so they passed laws about that there had to be a fence around it, that you can only wash within a certain distance of it, because obviously this is the main source of water. Eventually, as houses were built, each house would have had a well, but early on that was the source of drinking water, and you didn't want to pollute that.
And what about you, Miss Jones? Like, how were you getting your water when you came here in the 1830s?
Well, I had help, of course. I'd be up in the room and someone would come up the stairs and bring it to me. There was no way I was going to trudge through that Georgia clay and get my hem all messed up. No, sir, my daddy was from Virginia when he came over, so I can relate to that conversation. But as for getting the water myself, that's funny.
Nice life you had going there. You're listening to the Marc McMain Show. Bob Furr filling in for Jeff Hood, filling in for Mark, and we're talking about the evolution of food security, water, and food history in our area. So let's talk about Madison getting established. I'm just going to let you run with this one for a minute, Ken. Walk us through how Madison evolved from the very first buildings going up, through, say, when Miss Jones arrived here in town in the 1830s. And as you map that development for us, kind of map it against how people were getting their food and water and how that was evolving as well.
So early on, Madison was established by the Georgia legislature. We always say that local governments are the creatures of state governments, which is why they can kind of tell us what to do from time to time. But it was originally, as many early Georgia towns, it was the boundary was a circle. So it was a half-mile radius from the courthouse square.
And you can still see that today. If you look at a map of Madison, you can still see that circle.
Right.
There.
If you look at like Bostwick and Rutledge, you can really see theirs. Ours, we always say, it kind of looks like somebody popped a balloon toward the interstate and it all kind of bled that way. And they probably did that because it's just a lot easier to write down the boundary, just saying it's a half-mile radius versus at that time they were doing chains and lengths and oak trees and that sort of thing. So, and as people came in, of course, the square was established, and that was sort of a commercial area. But as you can see from the Rogers house, that there was an interspersal of residential as well. Everything else that was in that was called the Commons because it was held in common. We kind of looked toward the Academy, Old Post Road area as calling the Commons, but it was actually part of a larger Commons. And so that area was one of the first quote-unquote subdivisions. It was divided out in the early 1820s, and I think Miss Jones's house was part of that as well.
That's correct.
And so now, how are people getting their food, right? We still have subsistence farming, right, in the city. Are people farming the town common? Are they got their livestock? Are they, what's going on? Is town common part of feeding Madison at this point?
Not that I know of. I don't think it was like England or the early New England area where, they had sheep in the commons and everything. So most of the food production, and I'm not an expert on this part, was off the surrounding farms. I would suppose that most of the farms were, as you said, subsistence or self-sustaining, but would bring fresh food into town in order to sell it. Otherwise, we're starting to develop roads at that point in time, stagecoaches, and so dry goods would come in, and that would be things that had a longer shelf life.
Well, so if you're not an expert on it, let's go to somebody who was there. How were you feeding yourself back then in the 1830s, Miss Jones?
Well, we were living on an in-town farm, so we had 4 acres around Daddy's house, and so we did have lots of fruit and vegetables grown on site, and I'm sure that things were coming through the stagecoach that we could pick up if we wanted to add a little bit. But I'm sure we had chickens and whatnot to have some protein and something to go with my mint julep in the afternoon.
Of course, there were, as many of you know, the plantations would often have an in-town house. So an example of that is on Academy Street, the Walker, or they call it the townhouse, which kind of sounds, we think of apartments or townhouse, but it was their in-town house so that the children and the wives could participate in society. So, of course, they had a connection to their plantations outside of town. So I'm sure a lot of food came in that way as well.
And the reason they had those homes is, these plantations were vast, right? It might take you a day and a half ride to get yourself into the city.
Right.
And so these in-town plantations, they were actually, you'd have smokehouses and you'd have kind of growing your own crops. I mean, you weren't growing your own crops, Miss Jones, but somebody was growing them for you.
Correct.
Which brings me to the next point, which is obviously right from the start, from the point that Madison was first built. I say on our tour, Madison was quite literally built on enslaved labor. Like anyone that you see, any building that you see, and I know, Ken, you did a great story called The Two Doors on segregation later on. We're going to have you on to talk about that. But, from the start, any house or building you see that is built in Madison before the Civil War was built on enslaved labor. What do you guys know about how enslaved labor was impacting food production, the types of food people were eating? What did it look like in the enslaved communities?
Well, I guess there would be a dichotomy. Of course, they were instructed to do what their owners wanted them to do. So some of that would be food production. But then it wasn't evenly distributed between those who owned the plantation and those who worked it under enslavement. So that's where we get a lot of the great African-American, what we see as soul food, like green beans cooked with a ham hock, because they would get the bone left over from the actual ham that the plantation owner had. And so they would pass that around and use it over and over until literally they've sucked out every nutritional bit they could from it.
And we talked when we had Trey Wellborn on talking about barbecue, the tremendous influence that African Americans had on food, particularly barbecue. They brought this here to this country, and it just occurred to me, we're talking about doing a show on Prohibition, and I was thinking when we did the barbecue show, we had barbecue brought in. I'm not wondering if so. Yeah, a great point about that. So we have enslaved labor, struggling to find their own food, and yet, supporting and feeding the families in town, and really just playing such a huge role in food and water production in the city as we move forward. So during this time, Ken, we're still kind of in that pre-Civil War, antebellum era. Is there food coming into Madison from the outside world? I mean, other than from those plantations, the railroad's not here yet. Is any food being imported into Madison, or is Madison really self-sufficient?
I would assume that it was coming in on the newly established roads. But again, we're not talking about bringing in oranges from California, so probably not a lot of fresh food coming from outside, but rather things that have been prepared for a longer shelf life.
What do you remember? Any special foods that you remember standing out, Miss Jones, that were kind of a delicacy or something brought in? What about sweets or sugars or anything like that?
Oh, dear. I have to make sure that my crinoline and my corset fit specifically, especially when I'm about to come out into society, sir. So I'm more into soups and things that make sure that my figure stays trim and I can fit into the outfits that Daddy got me from overseas.
Well, again, glad to hear that you were doing so well during that time. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break here. We're going to let you dig into some commercial messages from our sponsors, try to whet your appetite for what they have to offer, and we'll be right back here on the Marc McMain Show on True Country
so close.
92.3. We'll be right back.
If you're selling or buying a home, you should call AM/PM Septic to inspect your septic tank. This could save you on costly repairs. AM/PM pumps your tank, fixes septic alarms, drain lines. They can fix any problem you're having with your septic tank. Call 770-231-7979. They do inspection letters. AM/PM is family owned and operated, licensed and insured company. Call David for all your septic needs. 770-231-7979.
The Madison Trolley Company is Morgan County's newest 5-star attraction. We offer historic Madison tours year-round, a haunted history experience in the fall, and our Madison Lights Christmas Tour and Mary Maddie Express Adventure for kids have become new holiday traditions. Our private charters add vintage charm to weddings and special occasions aboard a historic trolley by day, party trolley by night. Find us on the Madison Town Square or get on board by visiting madisontrolley.com or calling us at 706-997-1800.
Hey, this is attorney Bart Bitton with Bitton & Bitton. I live and work right here in Monroe, Georgia, and I am proud to serve this area. If you've been hurt in a car accident, you don't need some out-of-town lawyer that treats you like a number. You deserve a local lawyer you can trust, someone who lives here, works here, and takes care of people. So remember this, if you're ever in a car accident, be smart, call Bart. Bitton & Bitton, local lawyers you can trust.
And welcome back to the Marc McMain Show here on True Country 92.3. Bob Furr filling in for Jeff Hood, filling in for Mark here. And we are processing food and drink history in Madison. So 1840, I think it was 1841,
Sure.
Big news in Madison. The Georgia Railway arrives. I'll bet a lot of people assume today, from modern day context, that railway came from Atlanta or what was then Marthasville. But in fact, it came the other way, right? It came from
correct.
Augusta. And then within about 5 years, it had connected to Atlanta, which at the time, I guess, was Marthasville, still in the mid-1800s. How did the railway impact the city and its connections to the outside world, and specifically around our topic today, how people got food? And did Madison then start to export food? Is that when Madison's agricultural economy came to being?
No, cotton was king, and there were always along the way people saying, because they would actually buy corn from, say, the Midwest to feed the livestock, because they would plant cotton from fence row to fence row because that was what
So
the focus
profitable.
was. Yeah, so profitable. And I will have a note on the railroad. Actually, the original plan was for Augusta to Athens. It wasn't even planned to go to.
You once told me this story. Tell us
Yeah.
the story about how the railroad ended up in Madison.
Oh no, you're thinking about the interstate.
Oh, the
I think.
interstate. Okay, we'll come to that later.
So yeah, I think the first name for Atlanta was called Terminus.
Yes. Yep.
Because that's where the railroad terminated. But for several years, we were the terminus, and so that was a big boon because everybody was coming here to ship their cotton to Augusta. As far as food, obviously, it's much easier to bring food in on rail than it is across country on wagon and horses. So I'm sure that really started to develop stores downtown and that sort of thing.
And you got to feed the passengers, right? So now you have, is passenger traffic starting right off the bat here?
I believe so, yeah.
And so they're going to come to town. They need places to eat. So this is probably the first evolution of restaurants in Madison.
I'm sure that there were some beforehand because we all see the historic recreations of New England towns, and they were probably associated with the service of alcohol
Yeah.
as well. So there were probably some before, but given that we hadn't quite got the people taking the rail to visit Madison, but that came along quickly, and so yes, there would be service industries like restaurants.
And Miss Jones, like where were you going out to dinner during this time?
Well, mostly we would just have whatever Mama was cooking. Well, Mama's help. But when we would travel, it was we would eat out if we were going out to Savannah. But usually it was with our friends and neighbors. Not so much a restaurant per se. Is that what you're calling it? Restaurant?
Yes, that's a place where you go and you sit down and you buy food, and people serve you, and they provide you with food there.
Sounds French.
It sounds very much like the life you were living, except you didn't have to leave your house to experience it, from what I can tell. All right, well, let's take us into the Civil War, right? So going into the Civil War, as I say, America's tearing itself apart in the 1850s, but Madison's killing it, right? I would argue that was probably the peak decade for Madison and cotton production during the 1850s, money pouring into the town. How did the Civil War impact Madison was now there a reason to ship food out of Madison to supply the armies? And, how did that impact the coming of the Civil War? What supplies, were they short? What was it looking like in Madison during that period?
Well, still, I think it's still focused mainly on cotton because cotton was basically funds. So if the Confederacy could sell that cotton, which was difficult because there was a blockade at sea, then they could fund their side of the war.
So during the war, we do have a pretty big food impact, and I'm guessing you can speak to this, Miss Jones. So we've talked before about the show that kind of the whole story about Sherman's march destroying everything in their path is a little bit far-fetched. But one of the reasons that story arose, and what is true, is they picked the land clean. So any crops they needed, especially sweet potatoes, they loved, all the Union journals talk about sweet potatoes, because you don't have them up north, and they were, being harvested at that time. So a family might have their food stores completely taken. They weren't supposed to. The orders were that you were only supposed to take what, you could take as much as you needed, but you had to leave enough for the families to survive. But I guess I'll ask you, Miss Jones, what's that like, right? The Union Army comes through and they clean out Madison of livestock, horses, crops, food stores. How did that go for you?
Well, it was a wonder that we survived it all. I remember just watching from the window, and I remember a lot of the help was outside greeting them. They did put soldiers in front of our civilian homes and churches, but yes, it was hard to watch a lot of these plantations burn and taking all the food and tying up the railroads and destroying the depot. It was something to behold, truly.
And Ken, is this, what's this like for Madison after the Army comes through? Is it kind of, okay, we're out of food, but it's business as usual? How much of an impact did that really have?
It had quite a bit of an impact. Imagine basically most of your foodstuffs disappearing. Of course, they came through in November, so it's not like we're going to have a new crop.
Winter's coming.
Yeah, winter's coming. So it was a time of need. And so, of course, the next spring was a chance to bounce back from that. But there were several months where it was a little bit dire.
Yeah, it's interesting to wonder how much the town came together to help each other, during that period. I guess we have no way of knowing that. We were talking during the break about so many records being lost because of the fires and such like that. But, really just and Georgia largely untouched during the war. This isn't Virginia where Union armies are going through. I think Winchester, Virginia changed hands 17 times, right? So the Union Army came through twice in Madison and didn't really do that much harm. And so they were able to recover, quite quickly after that. You're listening to the Marc McMain Show on True Country Real Talk, Q92.3. Bob Furr filling in for Jeff Hood, filling in for Mark. So let's bring it to an end here. We have two big things that happened after the Civil War. First of all, in an instant, 22 months after the Emancipation Proclamation, 7 out of every 10 people in Morgan County who had been enslaved are now set free. And so that's got to have some kind of impact on the food and drink supply. And then, of course, in April of 1869, the entire downtown area burns down. So what is it looking like for Madison? You have this, I remember reading a journal where, a Union officer asked a woman about, how do you feel about these, formerly enslaved people joining the Union Army? And she was basically like, great, get them out of here because we got enough mouths to feed, So what's going on in Madison as the decade comes to an end? They've had this devastating fire. There's this new normal, I guess you would call it, in society. How are people feeding themselves? What are things looking like at that point in history?
Well, so they had to figure out going from an economy that was supported by free labor.
Or help, as some people in this
some
conversation
people
have
call it, yes,
referred to it.
Into something else. And so that's when we get the sharecropping and tenant farming. And so sharecropping would be where the owner provides a place to live, and you would work on the farm, and then you would keep a share, and the owner would keep a share. Tenant farming is they actually pay rent, and usually there's a debt, because often there would be a commissary where you buy your foodstuffs and other needs. Of course, it was owned by the plantation owner. So
the agricultural equivalent of a company town.
Exactly. So they would go into debt, and then when the fall came and they harvested the cotton, sold it off, hopefully they could at least cover their debt and maybe have a little bit. But often they didn't, so it kind of kept them on that location.
Kind of replacing legal slavery with economic slavery,
Exactly,
for lack.
exactly.
So let's talk about water, right? So we have this huge fire that devastates the downtown of Madison. You need 3 things for fire. You need fuel, you need oxygen, and you need heat. To fight a fire, you need manpower, water, and equipment.
Right.
Madison, I guess, had manpower, water, and equipment. Not so much. So how did that fire, did that fire impact the water situation? What is water collection, accessibility, and distribution looking like, say, from this period up into the 1900s in Madison?
So up into the early 1900s, it really didn't change a lot, despite people knowing that there was a need. Part of it is technology. I don't think they had a very good way of distributing the water. But as from the time of the fire up until 1908, we were still using wells, and that's how the fires were fought, were bucket brigades taken from the wells. And as the new century turned there was a lot of call for water, one for fires, but another just for sanitation. And so finally in 1908, we had a water system built.
So before the water system, speaking of sanitation, Ms. Jones, how are you taking care of business in that period?
First of all, I am aghast that you feel so comfortable asking me that question. I am a lady. And what I will say, sir, to change the topic, is I will say we were so proud of Madison prior to this fire breaking out, and then we became an example in the paper about what not to do everyone was talking about us, saying how ill-prepared we were, and I do believe that we changed things for other counties because we were so unprepared.
That's true. You'd see all across Georgia newspaper articles saying, this could happen to us as well. We need to do something about it.
But there's a myth here, right? Isn't the myth that after the fire they said, okay, everything's got to be built to brick downtown, and that's not quite how it went down, right?
Not quite how it went down. A lot of them were brick, but there were plenty of wooden buildings. And guess what happened to them?
I notice I don't see a lot of wooden buildings downtown these days.
They also succumbed to that fire later on.
So now we're seeing, this is the parallel, like in Madison, we're seeing American history through Madison's eyes, right? Because now when we come back from the break, we have reached an inflection point, a turning point, right? This is where we are going to truly see us move away from growing our own food, subsistence farming, to now food is commercially available versus restaurants and grocery stores. And we'll talk about that evolution when we come back. In the meantime, you're listening to the Marc McMain Show on True Country Real Talk, Q92.3. Bob Furr filling in for Mark, filling in for Jeff. We'll be back in just a moment.
The Madison Trolley Company is Morgan County's newest 5-star attraction. We offer historic Madison tours year-round, a haunted history experience in the fall, and our Madison Lights Christmas Tour and Mary Maddie Express Adventure for kids have become new holiday traditions. Our private charters add vintage charm to weddings and special occasions aboard a historic trolley by day, party trolley by night. Find us on the Madison Town Square or get on board by visiting madisontrolley.com or calling us at 706-997-1800.
Make sure your diesel is ready for every season by stopping in at Leadfoot Diesel. Their technicians have many years of combined experience to keep your Cummins, Power Stroke, and Duramax running the way it should. Plus, they can improve fuel mileage, perform upgrades, AC repair, and they offer tires, wheels, lift kits, and more. Diesel owners from all over the country trust Leadfoot Diesel, 320 Mayfield Drive in Monroe. Stop in or go to leadfootdiesel.com.
Double D Plumbing is a local, owned, licensed, and insured plumbing company in Loganville. You can reach Double D Plumbing at 770-466-8370. They have the ability to take on any plumbing job regardless of size or difficulty, with experience in all phases of plumbing, including commercial and residential, tankless heaters, sewer cameras, and drain cleaning. Call Craig Shepard at 770-466-8370 or visit them on the web at ddplumbinggeorgia.com. You're going to like the way they flow.
My name is Trace Akins. I'm from Moultrie, Georgia. To be an organ donor, it would make my family really proud to see something of me live on in someone else. I want my legacy to be me being there for someone who really needs me and helping someone out that really needs help, hoping that they will continue that legacy within themselves and do that with their friends and family.
When you become an organ and tissue donor, your story continues. LifeLink. Register today at mystorycontinues.com.
And welcome back to the Marc McMain Show. Bob Furr filling in for Mark, filling in for Jeff, who normally fills in for Mark here on True Country Real Talk, Q92.3. I'm reading it off the paper on your side there. Okay, so now we've reached this inflection point where how Americans get their food is really going to change, right? Mostly in cities, but now there's kind of the concept of instead of you having to get your own food on your own land or having it brought to you, as some in our conversation became accustomed to, actually you went out to get the food. So Ken, 1900 Madison, evolution of food and drink, go.
You'd be amazed at how many grocery stores there were downtown. I mean, they were small little businesses, and the competition was fierce. And when I say grocery store, that's different than a meat market. Early on, you did not go to the grocery store and get meat. You went to, they would just call it the market, but everybody knew that meant the meat market. In 1851, the city built a market on the square for people to use to sell meat, and it was there till 1887. And it was a pretty large structure, and it had a cupola on it with a bell, and they would ring the bell when they had finished butchering the cow in the morning, and people knew that there was fresh meat available to come get it.
And was there ample, was there then a mad rush to get your piece of the cow, or was you going to be confident that there would be plenty of food there whenever you got there?
I would assume that people would be confident that there would be plenty, but you might want to get there first to get the choicest cuts. And then starting around the turn of the 20th century, we started having meat markets that were like the grocery stores that were in their own standalone buildings. But a lot of the meat was still produced locally. Some of the ads would say, we have Mr. White's white-faced Herefords that we'll be butchering and having available. Also, some of it was raised in town. One of the meat markets was often advertising that they'd lost one of their hogs from the Canaan pasture area. So evidently over in the Canaan area there were pastures where they kept hogs and maybe some cows, and they would just talk about fresh food. It was definitely farm to table.
Piggy.
That's right. Yes, you might have even seen it wandering the streets the day before. But.
And was Madison exporting food at this point? Do we know? Like, are they? Is there any reason to? I guess it's still cotton.
It was still cotton. So I don't think there was much of a food export.
So tell us about the Morgan County freezer locker. Right? I don't know if I said that right, but the Morgan County freezer building that was in town. That to me is a pretty interesting concept.
Sure. So over the decades, there were different ways of preserving food. So obviously early on, they just had smoking, salting, that sort of thing. And then in the 1850s, Mr. Mason got a patent for mason jars, and people started canning. And so that was the way a lot of people preserved their food. And then along comes the 20th century, and we have refrigerators and freezers.
Yeah, because now we have electricity, right?
That's right,
So we have electrically. Now I just take my food, I can put it in a refrigerator. Right. But on these electric refrigerators, if they had a freezer, I mean, it was super, super tiny.
That's right.
So you could only store so much in your electric refrigerator and freezer.
Right. Is that another French word? Electricity.
Electricity.
No, electricity was, how do we describe electricity? It was like...
It's like lightning, but...
limitless power. Like you could just take this machine that could be kept cold by plugging it into the wall, and then you could put your food in there and it would stay fresh.
Mm-hmm. Should I call you Zeus? Do you want to read the Greek Iliad with me?
All right. Well, let's talk about that locker. How did that work?
Sure. So during the World War II, the paper was constantly calling for a freezer locker that other towns were starting to have. And what it would be is it'd be a large building that had a large freezer, and you would rent a space and freeze food there. So we got ours, I think, in 1947. And it had, besides the freezer, lots of things. It had a chicken plucker. It had you could butcher your hogs there, and so you didn't have to wait till hog killing time, which was when the weather got cooler, because you could just do it right there and put it right in the freezer. They had lots of ways to process their food in there, and it was a cooperative.
And this is a true turning point in food production in America because of the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So we have all these millions of troops distributed all around the world fighting this war. And so, you have canned foods, like all these different innovations that came. If they didn't get invented during that time, they get expanded during that time. And so this is an extension of that Second World War, that we see manifesting itself in Madison.
And you mentioned sweet potatoes earlier. So one of the things that the Army found that was easy to preserve was sweet potatoes. So they really they wanted people to grow sweet potatoes. One of the farmers here in Morgan County did that. And of course, downtown wasn't doing so great then because we'd gone through a depression, and then the fall off of business activity because of the war. So there were a lot of empty buildings, and so one of them was turned into a sweet potato curing house. They put the heaters in the basement and ran them up through the floor, and they cured potatoes in downtown Madison.
Lord have mercy, whose house was it? I hope it wasn't Daddy's.
It wasn't a house; it was one of the stores.
Goodness gracious.
And how does this strike in you for all this?
So many world wars. We're just getting through the Civil War, so I can't even imagine the whole world coming to wars. And I need to catch up on my French words.
Yeah, you might want to look up aircraft carrier. So we had these ships where you could have planes take off of the ships and then go and attack other ships.
I don't think she knows what a plane is.
Do y'all have any Madeira or wine available?
All right, so let's go. I want to switch gears real quick here. Listen to the Marc McMain Show, by the way. True Country, dang it, True Country 92.3. Bob Furr filling in for Jeff Hood, filling in for Mark. Let's talk water real quick. Water. I remember when they had the fire on the corner last summer. Former firefighter. It wouldn't have made any difference based on the nature of that fire. But the first thing that popped into my head is they don't have enough water for this fire. Like I could tell by the lines out and such. Tell us about the state of water in Madison. I understand it's a concern as part of the infrastructure, and what are the challenges and what are we doing about it?
So our first source of water was from Hard Labor Creek, and then in the 1970s we contracted with Georgia Power to, as they put it, dip our straw into Lake Oconee. But we are limited to what we can take from that because obviously they need to keep the reservoir up high enough to keep generating power. So that is, as growth comes and, possibly certain businesses that are connected to the information industry use a lot of water. So, you always, it's a balance between what you bring in and if you have enough resources to keep up with that. And
is Madison's water system, basically being served by those water towers that we see, or how and the infrastructure, the pipelines, are they? I've heard crazy talk like we still have wooden and ceramic pipes. Is that true?
We definitely have terracotta pipes.
Okay,
that's mainly in the sewer system. And I can tell you when I moved into my house, we had to replace that, and it was still terracotta pipes. So we do have a very aging infrastructure that needs to be taken care of. And as far as the water towers are fine. It's after they leave the water towers that we have a lot of infrastructure that needs to be replaced.
So, Ms. Jones, what we're talking about here is you go into your bathroom in your house and you do your business, and then that goes through a pipe into and joins another pipe with all the other houses' bathrooms connected to it, and then that water gets taken away, and then through a different pipe you have water coming into your house so that you can have it for your bath and all that sort of thing.
That sounds like a long-winded way to say chamber pot.
Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. Modern grocery stores. The arrival of I-69 or I-20, the Eisenhower Interstate System, Madison becomes nationally recognized as a tourist destination. Grocery stores arrive. Bring us into the modern day of the picture of food and drink in Madison.
So from the mid-20th century on, the grocery industry is ever evolving. So the first self-serve stores.
Oh.
Yes. So instead of asking the clerk, telling the clerk what you need and having the clerk gather everything up and then bring it to you, you would go in and find what you wanted and then bring it to the clerk to ring up.
I'm sure I can find someone to do it for me, sir.
Probably so. You seem very persuasive. And so we got our first chain grocery store in 1920. It was the Rogers store. It was quickly followed by an AMP. And so the Rogers store, they were joined with Colonial stores. In 1951, they built where one of the antique stores is near Town Park as a grocery store. That's when they went to self-serve, though there were others already downtown. They brought the meat market into the store, so there was a meat counter with the meat cutters there. And so eventually AMP followed that route too, and so they built a store where Town Park is now. But as things went, you needed a bigger and bigger store. So Colonial Stores built where Madison Drug is now. And they were basically put out of business when Piggly Wiggly built down the road and had far more, had a bakery and that sort of thing. So it went from clerks getting you a little box of food to driving your car somewhere, having a, as they say here, a buggy, which is not what we called it when I grew up, but where I grew up. And you would go in and buy a lot of groceries all at once. But the profit margin on grocery stores is razor thin, so they're always in big competition. And I think you're going to ask me a question about that'll relate to that later.
No, but now I want to know what it was. So tell me the question I was going to ask.
You were going to ask me when the Publix is coming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. No. So I do want to talk about so the Piggly Wiggly. That's what, the 2000 teens. That was built in the 80s. How long was that there?
It was there, I think, about 20 years, 20, 30 years.
And so that sat, what's there today, it's called, what's that building called today? North Main Village. And it's like it's a mixed use residential and retail property. And it's designed, it's under the Historic Preservation District Code that it's discernible but compatible, meaning it's compatible, it looks historic, but discernible. It's not impersonating a historic building, but it has the look of an old mill. But last question to tie into, the Madison Historic Preservation District and the protection of Madison's history has a direct tie to food, specifically fast food. Tell us that story.
Oh, that's a good one. Much of Madison was listed in the National Register in the 1970s, and people think that means you're protected. It does not. It's more of an honorific. And so Hardee's came to town, and they wanted to build in the downtown, and so there was no restriction against them doing it, so they tore 4 houses down to build a Hardee's, which is now torn down itself.
And that's what really triggered the movement and the protest that led to and that was like a 10-year process, right, to get that Historic Preservation District put together?
I don't know if it was that long, but yeah, it certainly is what spurred getting actual protections for our historic district.
Now, I've seen the document, the application, what they had to go through to make that. It's like, I don't know how many pages it is. How many pages is it? A lot.
30, 40.
30, 40. Want to guess whose name's on it? Ken Coker. Man.
Well, then that was the second one, so
okay.
I didn't do the original. We actually had our district thrown out and had to redo it, and that's when I got to write that.
Hard E's.
Hard E's.
Like hard F's? Like, did any other letters come before it? And then what's a Piggly Wiggly? It's not just a bunch of wiggly pigs.
No, it's one of these supermarkets where you go in and you push your cart around and you gather up all the food and then you check out and you pay money for it and you bring it back to
I do feel like I'm reading a fictional book when I'm with you fellas.
Well, last question, and it's the burning question. You know, the source of all current events and knowledge is, of course, the Morgan County, What's Happening in Morgan County Facebook page. So, Ken, let me ask you the 2 burning questions on everybody's mind. When is Tequila's reopening, and when are we getting a Publix?
Well, my understanding is Tequila's be opening maybe within a week. I think they're pretty close. I saw several people have gotten to walk in. I actually walked in a couple weeks ago. It's really going to be great. Does have a nice bar area and a lot more seating area and a huge kitchen compared to what they had before. So we should be getting good food.
You're not gonna bite on the Publix thing.
The Publix thing, sure. When there are enough people here, Publix will build.
Well, you've been listening to the Marc McMain Show. My guests have been Ken Coker, the knower of all things with Madison, and Miss Mary Jane Jones, played by Stephanie Donaldson. Folks, what you can't see at home here is that Stephanie's actually reacting to what we're saying in character as we're saying it and getting this expression on her face. Like, I'm starting to think I'm sitting here with somebody from the 1800s. Great job, Stephanie. Stephanie's the executive director of the Morgan County Historical Society. Hey, folks, tune in tomorrow. Marc McMain himself will be back hosting the Marc McMain Show. I'll be back next Tuesday with the final chapter of Tuesday's 250 by 50. Until then, this is True Country Real Talk, Q92.3. Bob Furr signing off. Take care.